So you can see where the screen is, so just sit where you're comfortable and can see it well.
Can I sit here?
Well, you can, but
sit there?
sit there where you can see it, and then you'll come up afterwards.
I've never seen it. Okay.
You've seen it, but you just, I mean, you can sit there. I'll join you in a minute. All right, welcome everyone. Big night here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane. At least it is for Don Willingham and Spokane's spaceman. And I'm not sure if folks are streaming with us or not, but we do have it streaming, so welcome to you as well. We're going to record this so we can put it online as well, so even if folks aren't streaming, they can watch it. So we've had a bit of a reception here at 6, and we're going to, in just a minute, show the documentary. It's about 30 minutes, and then we're going to come back for some questions and answers from Don. Actually, you'll ask the questions and he'll give the answers, so you don't have to worry about a pop quiz or anything after the documentary. But I did want to give just a little bit of background on the documentary and how it came to be. About 3 years ago, I gave a sermon from this pulpit called Leaving Earth, and it was about the space program, particularly where it is now and where it's heading. And a couple of days later, Don came to my office with some books, and he started talking about this Ranger project, or Project Ranger really is the correct term, and his role in it. And he's showing me these books, and he's got his name in all these books, and I'm hearing about this amazing story, and I knew nothing about it. I didn't know there was a Project Ranger. I never thought about the space program outside of the first manned mission, and so I was just astonished by it, and I wanted for a long time to interview Don because I just felt that the story has to be preserved. And so several months later, we got together and I interviewed Don with a green screen behind him, and at that point he's telling me the story, which is just amazing. I think we've captured it really well. And he talked a lot about one of his young cohorts at the time, named Tom Reinsfleisch, and his key role. And I started putting the documentary together, and it just kept being obvious that I had to have Tom in it as well. So I contacted him. He's a professor at Stanford University. And he wasn't comfortable getting together. It was in the midst of COVID, and I promised him I'd come down and I'd social distance. We could do it outside, but he wasn't going to have it. So the project just sort of sat on my computer, and then the vaccines came out, and I gave it another shot. He was kind enough to let me come down, and actually we interviewed him. Peggy went with me, and we interviewed him in his home, and it just ended up being just what this thing needed to fully tell the story. And particularly, you see, even though they weren't in the same room together, the real respect and collegiality that still exists between these two guys who pretty much had their first job together at JPL. So that's the background. Again, it's about a 30-minute story. It was a labor of love, and I love it. So, Remembering Ranger, NASA's first moonshot.
Very, very fine grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder. Ground mass is very fine. I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man.
yet so little known.
Well, my name is Don Willingham, and I want to talk to you today about my experience with the first spacecraft that went to the moon and successfully took pictures.
Temperatures 250 degrees below zero.
When I was growing up in the 6th, 7th, 8th grade was when space first started being talked about. And Werner von Braun was the German guy who had all kinds of space articles in him at that time, Collier's magazine, and I just was gaga about that. And I would have never been happy if I hadn't been able to go into doing the space program. It just so happened that Purdue University started the year before I started in college a program of engineering physics training that was made to train people who would go between the pure physicists and the practical engineers, and that was the program that I got in. And they took the top 40 applicants after their freshman year, and so I was really looking for that. And if I hadn't done that, I don't think I ever would have felt complete. I had just graduated in engineering physics with a master's degree from, as it turned out, Purdue University. And I had 2 years of active duty because I was a reserve officer training candidate. And I had 2 years to do in the military. It so happened that Jet Propulsion Lab, which is a new part of NASA, interviewed at my college, and they decided that I could be useful to them, and they asked the military to assign me to the Jet Propulsion Labs.
Ranger was designed simply to hit the moon. Before it crashed into its lunar impact point, it would send back to Earth close-up TV pictures of a portion of the moon's surface.
And that had never been done before. Basically what we were doing is we were turning the camera, TV camera, into a scientific instrument.
Mare cognitum.
The only problem was I had never taken a picture with a camera. I didn't know what ASA was, shutter speed, focal length. I mean, I really knew nothing. And my boss, who was interviewing me, said, "You're just the person I want. I want someone who has no preconceived notions." Well, the first thing that seemed fairly obvious was you probably had to learn what the brightness was of the moon. If you go out and look at a full moon, you will find that it looks the same brightness all over. Well, that's kind of strange because it's a ball. And when you're over here at the side and the sun's coming in, you would think it would get dimmer. But it also turns out that in a full moon, we're looking essentially in the same direction that the sun is. And it so happens because of the dusty nature of the moon, most of the light is reflected back towards the sun. We have this problem of don't take a picture under full moon conditions. If you look at a quarter moon or any partial moon coverage, you will notice that the outer circular edge is bright, and as you go towards the night-day line, which is called the terminator, you will see that the light level changes and gets less, and you get contrast in the scene. That means when you have slope changes, like in a crater, you're going to get brightness differences. And that's what you want. The only problem is, how close do you go to the terminator? How sensitive is the camera? You get too close, it's going to be too dark.
This is the Ranger 6, a space vehicle that's about to leave. Like any tourist, it's equipped with cameras, 6 of them, designed to send back 3,000 pictures of the lunar surface just before it crash lands on the moon.
This is in the period of 1961 through 1965, and NASA had only been formed 2 years before this. Half a century ago. It's not like sticking your phone camera up and it adjusts to the brightness and makes the focus good and everything. All of these cameras were fixed. They had a fixed shutter speed, fixed f-stop, fixed sensitivity on the film that would come out after it got played back and recorded. And so you're stuck. And keep in mind, the space program was where transistors got developed. I mean, transistors weren't really a big thing until the space program came along. We were using state-of-the-art transistors. And you know, you had to be really careful about them. They'd burn out, and some of them would work and some of them wouldn't. Even the TV cameras that were on this, you think of the TV tubes that register the picture. RCA was building them. They had to hand select each tube because the tubes were not all that consistent a lot of the time.
Are you getting a TV picture now, Houston? Neil, yes, we are getting a TV picture.
When in the old days we had rabbit ears, which most of you probably don't remember, but at any rate, there were times when you get really poor reception and it would look snowy. In that kind of case, if you wanted to see something, you didn't go up and sit real close to the TV. You backed off and tried to get rid of the snow, which is called filtering. You're filtering the noise. We had brightness of the moon, sensitivity of the camera, and the noise. Well, I was very lucky in that about the first year after I started working, I had assigned to me a young physicist. Now I say young, I was 25, 26, he was all of 21. And a brilliant physicist, graduated from college in 3 years and never had a bad grade.
Well, I was a research assistant early on because I was enrolled at Caltech as a graduate student and I was working there during the summer. To show you how important I was, I arrived at JPL my first day and they said, "Who are you? What are you supposed to be doing?" I said, "I have no idea. I have a job here." And so Don was one of the first people I met when I finished discovering where I was supposed to go as a summer student coming into the lab. Don had discovered some measurements that an astronomer in Russia had taken of what's called the photometric properties of the moon. That is, if you beam the sunlight at the moon and are looking at a different angle, how does that light get reflected?
And he and I together worked on this problem. And we decided what we wanted to do was to come up with a number that would take all these things into account, and that number would basically say how small a crater would be in diameter that somebody looking at the pictures could just detect. And that number ended up being what we called a figure of merit.
And it combined a whole set of issues from the properties of the television camera, the lens system, the motion that was taking place as the spacecraft approached the moon, and put that together to estimate what the smallest object was that could be seen in the pictures as they came back. And so it guided the scientific mission of figuring out where to impact the moon and how to do the timing so that you got there at just the right time to get the pictures that you want.
But we don't know one important thing: what the lunar surface is really like. Scientists, astronomers have argued, theories have been devised, and still the arguments continue. Hopefully, Ranger's pictures will be the first step toward ending such arguments.
The first 5 Rangers failed. Well, they didn't have much of a camera system on them. They were just used mainly for testing things out. Rangers 3 through 5 had 1 camera and then some scientific instruments.
Solar panels, an omni and high-gain antenna, mid-course motor, electronics, batteries, and the television subsystem.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition main stage.
This was the first part of the civilian space program, and some of the early Ranger shots were on Vanguard rockets that got slightly off the ground and then tipped over and burst into flames. And there were all sorts of mishaps along the way because people hadn't done this before. In fact, one of the early Ranger missions was on its way to the moon, and it looked like it was going to be a wonderful mission. And they had to make a mid-course correction in order to hit the part of the moon that they wanted. And it turns out there was a minus sign that was in error in the navigation program, and so it went the wrong way.
The first 2, they failed miserably, and they stayed up just long enough to get the spacecraft separated and to test the stable platform. Ranger 3, it separated okay, but was missing so far, and then they had the wrong sign on the direction. Rangers 4 and 5, the electronics failed. And what they discovered was a lot of things. One, the Air Force had changed the payload amount. And so JPL had to skimp on both the experimenters that were on board, but they also skimped on the electronic redundancy in the design. And they had really sloppy management, sloppy testing techniques. And what happened in the 1-year hiatus between Ranger 5 and Ranger 6, 7, 8, 9 was they went back, changed their whole philosophy. One, you don't ever skimp on the spacecraft design. And that was something that was very important for the manned mission, was how did you really do things safely?
Correct. And of course the mission is very complicated. It isn't just a matter of hitting the moon. You have to launch from the Earth. You have to do the transit to the moon. You have to get there at the time when the moon is rotating so that the crater system or the objects that you want to photograph are in the right place, and the camera is ready to take the pictures when that happens. And so it's a time sequence that has to be worked out in tremendous detail.
The management structure, I mean, heads rolled. It was not clear the management structure between NASA headquarters and the Jet Propulsion Lab. And certainly the lines of communication between the Air Force and NASA were not clear. So there are just all these things that got ironed out, and I don't know where the main impetus was, the science or the engineering. Probably a little bit of both. After the year hiatus, because of all the failures, they ended up just having only camera systems on board the spacecraft. So Ranger 6, 7, 8, and 9 had 6 cameras. And each of the cameras was a little bit different in terms of what they would view. The A camera viewed a big area. The B camera viewed an area maybe a third that size. And then there were 4 cameras called P cameras that really viewed small areas.
Tranquility. Within a few seconds of its estimated time of arrival,
Ranger, as it approached the moon, had about 23 minutes to take pictures before it crashed. And those pictures had to be gathered and transmitted back before all of the instrumentation was destroyed as it hit the moon.
the cameras did not operate as the Ranger landed within a mile of the target area. 5 previous Ranger shoots have been failures, but it is imperative the scientists know more about the moon's atmosphere and terrain before a manned flight. Thus, high hopes go with this launch of Ranger 6, a $28 million trip of 230,000 miles.
Now Ranger 6 was the first one with a good camera system on it. Man, it went right where it was supposed to go. First time any of the spacecraft had come close to going where they were supposed to go.
Meanwhile, the Deep Space Instrumentation Facility tracked Ranger, maintained two-way communications from Woomera and from the tracking station in Johannesburg, South Africa. Processed a continuous flow of information to Pasadena. Within 90 minutes, a first rough orbit was established. Ranger would hit the moon.
The only problem is the cameras, they never did turn on all the way. So went all the way in and no pictures. So big investigation, another delay. And what they discovered was, as this thing went up through the atmosphere, probably 30 seconds after launch, there was an electrostatic discharge that turned the camera system on. Keep in mind, this was 4 transistors. These are high voltage tubes and all this kind of stuff. And what happened was, you can't turn on the camera system in between total vacuum and static pressure. So you had partial pressure, the arc happened, the high voltage tube burned out, and the thing was dead after the first 30 seconds. It was pretty clear that something better happened that's good real quick, or there were going to be heads roll starting at the highest level, and who knew how far down to go. So they did Ranger 7, and Ranger 7 finally worked like a charm. I mean, it was just perfect.
Here in the Spaceflight Operations Facility, great excitement prevailed as Ranger neared the moon, and its pictures came alive on the TV monitor.
We are 5 seconds from full power. We have full power on F channel. Roger. Full power on F channel. All kinescope recorders are recording. All magnetic tape recorders are recording. Preliminary look at video appears to be approximately normal anticipated strength. Video on both A and B receivers on the F channel are good. Video is very strong. Video is very clean. This is Goldstone TV Control.
Now, NASA could send more instrumented probes out from Earth and down to the moon to make scientific studies, to survey the terrain, to select landing areas, to prepare for the time when man himself would walk the lunar soil.
And that was really exciting. I mean, the pictures were fantastic. We were involved in the process of enhancing and processing those pictures so that we could get the most science out of the photography from a geology and planetary science point of view.
For each camera, there were like maybe 200 to 400 pictures. You have to keep in mind that this was when the Cold War was going on. And all of a sudden, this became a big international thing. And so NASA printed up like 300 of these boxes and sent them to all the major embassies, advertising that the United States was a peace-loving country and shared its science freely with everybody.
The extraordinary pictures sent back from the successful Ranger 7 mission caused substantial modifications in earlier theories about the moon. They resulted in lunar maps and models of an accuracy and scale to within a few feet. The area within the Sea of Clouds, which Ranger 7 photographed, was renamed Mare Cognitum, the known sea. Ranger 8 target areas were re-evaluated according to Ranger 7 findings.
It would have been much riskier for humans to land on the moon if we didn't know what the texture of the surface was, how deep the dust was, and so a lot of the development of the Apollo program was actually informed by the information that we brought back.
The Ranger 8 mission achieved its objectives. Not the least of these was the further qualification of the sophisticated and highly accurate guidance and command systems, and of camera technology. These systems performed at their peak when Ranger 9 was launched successfully in March. As it approached the moon, it sent back from its 6 cameras
more than 5,800 pictures of the lunar surface. Here is a speeded-up sample. Ranger 9 marked the completion of the successful program managed by Jet Propulsion Laboratory for NASA. We have learned a great deal from this program. For example, we know that the lunar surface within a crater like Alphonsus is remarkably similar to the surface of Mare Tranquillitatis and Mare Cognitum, photographed by earlier Rangers. If firm enough, these surfaces may be suitable for the landing of the unmanned Surveyor and the manned Lunar Excursion Module.
The Surveyor mission was a lander so that you could see what the texture and how deep the dust was on the moon before you started putting men there. And so all of these unmanned missions went along in parallel with the development of the Apollo program, but nobody ever heard of Ranger or Surveyor. It only got the manned missions that hit the press.
So in the long run, the Ranger provided some really nice scientific information. And it was the first spacecraft that was really successful in going to the moon.
There is lots of noise that is present in the pictures. The contrast isn't exactly what you wanted, even though you're able to hit pretty close to where you were going. And so digital processing was basically invented to try to correct some of those distortions that are present in television images. And because the cameras were coming in at an angle to the surface, the pictures were distorted geometrically. And so we were able in the computer to rearrange the pixels on the resulting image so that it was as if you were looking straight down. And this was a benefit from the point of view of seeing the shapes of craters, the depths of craters, and so on.
By the way, I must tell you, this young man went on to do absolutely fantastic things in the internet and image processing. I mean, he was genuinely brilliant.
After that, I became an engineer and then a senior engineer, and I was supervisor of the image processing group at JPL. And that was just before I came to Stanford.
I should say one of the other things that developed was the idea of mission operations. Even though things were launched from Cape Canaveral, once it got up in the air, then the control reverted to the Jet Propulsion Lab. They would pick up a telephone and talk to each other. I mean, it was that primitive. The other thing is they didn't have it closed off, so bigwigs could come in the middle of things and start asking questions. So it evolved that a modern type of management system in mission operations. You know, you have lots of screens and you have restricted areas and that kind of thing. So that was a development that people hadn't thought of before.
The science team was very, very impressive. The people who were looking at the geology, Gene Shoemaker, Harold Urey was one of the investigators who had a Nobel Prize in chemistry, and Gerard Kuiper, who discovered some of the farthest orbiting debris that circles in the solar system. And so these were people that were world-class people, and I was a fresh graduate student immersed essentially in a candy shop.
Harold Urey, who got a Nobel Prize for discovering heavy water. There was Gerard Kuiper, who was head of the University of Arizona astronomy department, and he had discovered one of the moons of Jupiter. There was Gene Shoemaker, who was head of the U.S. Geological Survey department in Flagstaff that specialized in planetary items. And these were guys that I ended up, at age 26, working with very closely. And they were all old. They were probably between 10 and 20 years younger than I am right now, but they seemed old.
It was an exciting time, it was an innovative time, and it was absolutely exciting from a technical point of view.
All kinds of things came out of the Ranger project. I was very proud to be involved in that, and lucky.
Diathlete for mankind. Oh, that looks beautiful from here.
Now me, working in my little cubby hole on this, I didn't know anything about all this intrigue going on. And there's a whole book written that NASA did about all the intrigue and the problems and the rewards and what have you. And I didn't know that until I read that book about 5 years ago. So.
Imaging continues to be one of the most important and revealing parts of these space missions. Whether you're going to Jupiter or Saturn to see the rings, seeing the rings is what's important. If you were to fly by and only get measurements of the magnetism or some other abstract property, it isn't the same as seeing the lovely photographs of the rings of Saturn.
Thank you. I really didn't know what to put in the credit, so, give credit where credit is due. But Don is going to come up and he wants to talk just a little bit about some of the technical stuff, about 5 minutes, or I promise I'll elbow him because I want you to be able to ask questions. And I do have a microphone, so I'll bring it around to those of you who might want to ask some specific questions. But really, the man of the hour or half hour, Don Willingham.
Okay, Todd says I got 5 minutes, okay? And I want to amplify some of this stuff. One was they talked about 300 copies of the things that went to various embassies. And here's one of the A camera pictures. There were 199 of them. And they put these things on vellum-backed papers that big and sent them out, okay? I happen to have a set. And then there was an information booklet that went along with that. And the handout I gave you has some information that's in there. I just wanted to show it to you really quick. One is the first page shows you the actual coverage of the different cameras. And the A camera covered a really much bigger area than the B camera. And then there's the 4P cameras, okay? Now, the A and B cameras took 2.5 seconds to take a picture. They alternated, so these pictures are like 5 seconds apart. The P cameras did like 0.2 of a second, and so they cycled every 0.8 of a second. So the P cameras, which you saw nesting in the videos, got much closer. Then, the next page, we talked about making a TV system into a scientific instrument, and that meant doing a bunch of testing. And the kind of testing we did was in this next page. But the top one just shows how much the brightness of the scene gave you to the film. So a certain brightness gave you a density and what have you. And then the lower one is what we call the frequency response. And as if you have light-dark pattern and it's spaced out quite a bit, you get a full signal. But that light-dark pattern gets closer and closer and closer, the camera eventually can't respond at all. And it just doesn't react to it. So that's what we did as far as making it a scientific instrument. Then the next page in is how we presented our wonderful figure of merit thing, okay, that Tom and I worked on. And we ran trajectories in the trajectory program and come up with contours of how big an area of device, how big a crater you could detect in the pictures. And if you look the sweet spot on the ANB cameras, they're about 10 degrees, 20 degrees from the terminator, and you'll see a dot on each of these two things. That's where the experimenters picked as the landing place, okay? And so, you know, it worked out pretty well. And then the final page of this thing, if I can get to it, is the detail that we provided, that we provided for each of the pictures. There's 199 pictures, gives the latitude, longitude, and the height, and all that kind of stuff. And it also gives the scale that you see on these little marks on the picture, so you can see how big an area is, or they'll know how big an area is on the surface. And then, just kind of as an aside, if you had this and you went into the part where the technical stuff starts, if you have a magnifying glass, you can actually see who the authors were, okay? I was one of the 3 authors on that, okay? But our names kept getting smaller and smaller, and the introductory part of the scientists and the NASA headquarters guys got bigger, okay? Then the last thing I'm going to say is there's, on the last page, there's a reference of 5 technical articles, okay? One of them is the Russian data that I used for developing the reflectivity properties of the moon, okay? The other 4 are technical papers from JPL. I happen to be co-authors on 3 of those papers, okay? So, not that I'm want to bring out anything, but, you know, did I take 5 minutes? Okay.
Don has reason to be proud, so any questions for Don? I'll bring the microphone so everyone can hear what you ask. Just hold it close.
Thank you, Don. Great presentation. So this ran for approximately 6-7 years, was it? 61 through 68 or so, as I recall. Did it say?
Todd, I'm going to need you to come up here and interpret because I'm deaf as a post, okay? And it doesn't make any difference how you pronounce it over a microphone. I get that.
So he was asking the length of years that this project went on.
Oh, well, I went to JPL in 1961, and this thing, I left, this was 65, but there was there were the first Rangers 3, 4, and 5, which took a while, and then they screwed up so bad that they took a year to develop other stuff and look at all the procedures and everything. So basically it was 2.5 years, I'd say, okay, that I
Okay.
was working on this.
Okay, so my question related to during that period of time, because there was a lot of technological development that was going on, was the camera equipment improving during that time, and did that affect your work?
So he's asking if the camera equipment improved over those years.
Well, not really, because the first the Rangers 3, 4, and 5 had a lot of instruments and just one camera. And then Rangers 6 through 9 were redesigned, and basically it all came together, and what they picked for them didn't improve from one end to the other, but it was a new venture in a sense, and RCA did the development of the camera system and everything. So, yeah.
You might add that the Ranger 7, which was the first successful mission, happened in 1964, just to give you a time frame.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So,
When was the last one? Was it 67, number 9? Do you remember?
I don't really remember.
Yeah.
But it was about that, yeah.
60,
So,
yeah.
yeah. And I have to tell you, then after that, you saw the first soft lander that was there. I worked on that one in the same kind of thing on the camera system, what have you. Yeah. So, and that was a lot more successful than the Ranger was. Yeah.
Tell us about Pioneer.
He wants you to tell him about Pioneer.
What about Pioneer?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean Pioneer 10 and 11. I left JPL after 7 years, and I went to work designing space systems for 5 years. And I'd had a degree in designing electronics, so it was kind of a relief to get in that. The last spacecraft I designed and managed, I designed the analog electronics and managed the program, and it was an ultraviolet photometer that measured photons of hydrogen and helium, and it went on Pioneer 10 and 11, and was the first spacecraft that went to Jupiter. Okay.
How long did it take?
How long? Oh, it took 2 years to get there. Yeah, but when I got done with that, I was burned out. Okay, I had 11 years, and I decided a great place to come was Spokane. And we started driving in a camper with our 3 kids and my wife at that time, and ended up here at the Bowling Pitcher, okay, camping, and we ended up staying here forever. Haven't been sorry since, okay? So these, by the way, are my kids sitting there in the front row there, two of the 6, okay? So, and then my granddaughter and daughter-in-law were there, so.
Can you pass the mic up to Owen?
When you were working on the Ranger, you were in California, correct? But all the launches were at Canaveral. So you never got to see a launch up close.
He's saying that you were in California even though the launches were in Cape Canaveral. So did you ever see a launch up close?
Oh, yeah. I was kind of lucky because I would be able to go on the Surveyor each one. We'd go down to the Cape and do calibration of the camera system. On Pioneer 10 and 11, I went down and watched the launch of that. I had a great time. I would go to NASA headquarters to do presentations and go to RCA to work on the camera systems of the first Ranger ones and be in mission operations representing the science. So, and then work with the trajectory guys. So I was just really lucky, you know, so, and naive as hell, so.
Last question. The first 2 years you were there, you were on active duty for the Air Force, and then you got out and you were a civilian working in the same job. Is that correct?
He's asking about your military experience. So you were in the military first couple of years, and then you were working as a civilian afterwards.
Yeah, I stayed on at the same position. My salary got a little bit bigger than the military one, but
The photographs we saw of you were all in civilian clothes. So did you wear a uniform when you were in that position?
Did you ever wear a uniform
yeah, I wore a uniform the day I arrived at JPL and 2 years later when I left. Okay, so yeah.
Are there other questions?
How long did the Pioneer operate? How many years did the Pioneer continue to operate?
How many years did I work on the Pioneer?
How many years did Pioneer, did the project last, I guess? How long did it operate? You know?
Oh, Lord. I was up here when it got launched, and it took 2 years to get to Jupiter, but I think I heard that it got turned off something like 15 years later. So it was going to outer space and it was still working.
Way past its expectancy. Way beyond what it was expected.
Beyond its expectancy.
Say it again?
Beyond its expectancy.
Oh, yeah. Well, instruments are kind of like if they got through the first year or so, and they seem to kind of keep going quite a bit, you know. So, yeah, it went into outer space supposedly.
Where was it? Where was it when it was last detected?
Do you know where Pioneer was last detected?
No.
Beyond Pluto.
Hmm?
Out beyond the orbit of Pluto.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it pretty much left our solar system in 15 years. What it was originally partly to do, measure hydrogen and helium particles, and they hoped that it would find the radius of the heliosphere, which meant where the solar wind, all the sun particles would turn and be attracted to the rest of the galaxy, and never found it. So,
Was that 10 or 11?
Let's just, I want to move on because we've got a microphone going over here. So,
Okay,
yeah,
I have
thank
a
you.
couple questions. First one is, some of your work was based on the research of a Russian scientist, and I'm wondering, did you have any actual in-person collaboration with that person, or did you simply work off of the paper that they had published?
yeah, no, they had published brightness data on the moon, looking at the moon from the Earth as the sun's shone on different things. Basically, what I took that data was to transform it from latitude, longitude things to where you could predict with the sun coming in it this way and you observing this way, you could predict the brightness. And that I just used their numbers, you know, and then recast them in a different way.
Don, was that scientist living at the time, or did you ever get to interact with him?
Yeah, you know, now that you mention it, we went to the International Astronomical Union in Hamburg, Germany, right after that, and he was at that International Astronomical meeting. Yeah, so, I mean, he seemed really old to me at the time, but maybe 65.
Did you have
Yeah, one more question. So back then, we really didn't know a whole lot about the consistency of the lunar surface and whether or not it would be safe to land humans there, if they would sink into dust or what would happen. And your work helped establish that that could safely occur. And I'm just wondering if any of the astronauts, maybe Neil Armstrong, bothered to express gratitude to you, send you a thank you card or something, so that he didn't have to worry about sinking into the moon when he landed on it.
I think they kind of established that, but you know, it was when the Surveyor did its soft landing that it really solved that problem. Yeah. Did I answer the question? Did I hear it right?
He was also asking if any of the astronauts who actually stepped on the moon, ever recognized or acknowledged the significance of these earlier programs, to your knowledge.
Oh, no. You know, after the manned program came along, everything centered on them, you know, pretty much. Yeah.
But I think, you know, one of the important things to remember about this little-known piece of space history is this really was humanity's first hard contact with something other than our own planet in the universe. So it is a big deal. It's not as sexy as the first step, but it's the first touch.
Yeah. And there's the, this is the book that wrote the history of Ranger, and it was actually published in 2010, and I ran across it because I Googled Tom Rindfleisch, hadn't seen him in years and years, and he had his own webpage still, 75 or so. And then I had the audacity to Google me, okay? And they had some quotes from me in this book, which I didn't know existed. So that's when I got this thing, and it was quite a revision, but I'm not in there very much, okay? Just a few sentences here and there. So.
Well, I don't know if this is me swimming out of my lane here, but it's given that you haven't really received, it seems to me, due recognition for your contribution, they should name the crater that that probe made on the moon after you.
But I tell you, I have to tell you something. If I hadn't come along, the experimenters would probably have picked pretty close to the same places that they picked even with this. I mean, we don't really think about it. I mean, it's great to have it and everything, but everything probably would have gone along just fine without me, if you want to know the truth. And I have one more thing to say. If Ranger 7 had not succeeded, they were so ready to scrap the whole program, move all the unmanned stuff, I think, from JPL to some other center. I mean, it was really that big a deal. And I attended a wonderful party after that. You never saw so many drunk, famous people in your life, you know. So, anyway, it was lots of fun. So.
Yeah, I don't think Don gives himself enough credit. They discovered the math necessary to photograph the moon, and that had never been done before. So maybe someone else would have eventually figured it out, but maybe not before the program got scrapped. So you were in the right place at the right time.
All right, there's one thing I have to say. Man, didn't he do a great job? I cannot believe that he put that together. So, yeah.
One more quick question. You said that the tubes would burn out with the static as they're passing through the atmosphere. So what brought on that realization?
So how did you figure out that the tubes, that there was a static discharge that caused those tubes to burn out?
I didn't figure it out. There are some people that looked at the telemetry data and just finally said, hey, there was this, the cameras got turned on, 30 seconds, and then they were dead, okay? So, you know, and it's amazing. Build up static electricity, and it just simulated a camera turn-on signal with the static electricity. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I also personally just find it amazing when you start to think about the technology back in 1960. I mean, we all remember the TV. I think most of us in here remember the TV tubes. I mean,
do too.
Those were fragile enough to break just touching them, and they're going to blast them off through the atmosphere out of the gravity well, you know, and hope that they can turn on in time to actually take pictures and send it back. I mean, that was working with some really rough technology.
Yeah, yeah. So, thank you everybody for coming. Okay.
I haven't promoted it, but this is actually on YouTube now. So my bigger mission in producing this was so that the story can be told. I want it to be accessible, so it's now on YouTube, and hopefully the more people who watch it, the more it'll come up when you hit Project Ranger. And yeah, we can do that. We sure will. Yeah. Great. All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you.